welcome back to another episode of the Dylbozer's Den. And today we're a little backed up. And what I mean by that is I've pushed off this review for a little while. I really want to give this album we're going to talk about today a little bit more of a listen. This is a little bit something different. It's not death metal. There's no blast beats. There's no grinding. There's no ungodly, grossly nasty, froggy vocals on this. This is a rock and roll record. This is a suggestion from my co-host of the Riff Worship podcast, Austin Paulson. He said this be right up my alley. Probably comes from years of playing Jessica and Rambling Man as a joke to him. We're talking about Philadelphia's own Sheer Mag with their newest release, Playing Favorites, released recently on Third Man Records, which is a label I'm most familiar with a few releases, which would be a release from Sleep, The Sciences, as well as a split done with the Insane Clown Posse from like 15 years ago and a more recent Boris release. If you ever rode around in your parents' car when you're growing up, or probably some of your grandparents, and heard classic rock radio, and I mean stuff from like the 60s and the 70s, all of like James Gang, Free, even a little bit Bad Company, but you also heard some of the more proto rock and roll bands of like funk, R&B, and soul. I hear a lot of Jackson 5 on this and kind of Motown stuff. Nothing that I could really point out because I'm not entirely familiar with those acts, but definitely stuff you would hear from that era of music. You know, a lot of acts kind of get lumped in with the whole punk rock thing and saying, oh, they've got punk rock ethos. And I'm not knocking that here, but sometimes it just kind of gets tagged in as a way to kind of lump bands into a corner. And I guess there's some punk influence to this, maybe stuff more so in the vein of like the MC5 or the Stooges. So some of those very proto-punk bands, but this definitely doesn't sound like Bad Brains. This doesn't sound like Black Flag, anything like that. There's harmony guitars on here all over it. There are great riffs on this album. I would even lump in some very early Aerosmith kind of rock and roll stuff on here. I could definitely hear some Alice Cooper on here. This band's fantastic. This is an album that really struck me and really shocked me. You know, I can definitely hear some Jackson 5 influence in the vocals from, hopefully I pronounced their name correctly, Christina Halliday sings her ass off on this record. I definitely hear some Anthony Green in there from Circus Survive, Early Seosin. This band doesn't sound anything like those, but I can definitely hear that in her voice as much as I do hear a little bit of Michael Jackson. The interplay between all the other instruments is amazing. The production sounds really good. This sounds more in vein of like the bass and the drums actually do the fundamentals, which really opens it up that you've got a standard bass part and you've got a standard guitar part. So with the bass and the drums almost playing their own part, but the guitars are playing something on top of all that to just actually make the structure of what it is. The guitars are kind of the icing on the cake. I believe most of the record was written between the two brothers. That would be Kyle Seeley and Hart Seeley. Kyle Seeley on guitar, Hart Seeley on bass, and I believe Kyle Seeley actually recorded the drums on this record. So you've got definitely a great interplay between the drums and the bass on there, and maybe that there was a reason for that. But man, this record sounds good. This band's firing on all cylinders. This is one of those bands I feel like you could go see and definitely get some jams based off of the tracks that are playing. Speaking of the tracks, I don't want to digress. The singles all lined up, Playing Favorites, Moonstruck, favorite off of this album for me. Eat It and Beat It, I think, has some of the most fun lyrics in it. These are 4 great tracks. I am glossing over this album. Fantastic album. Definitely going to be a pick at the end of the year for me as kind of my like non-aggressive album to listen to. It's going to be hard to beat this. You know, it's short, less than 40 minutes. These guys are straight and to the point. Big catchy choruses. This is the 3rd release from the band, and from what I grasped, it's kind of the band coming into their own. And what I like about this record is every few years or so, a record kind of hits me out of nowhere that becomes a favorite of mine. You know, when I was younger, it was a band like The Darkness. One of the albums that really struck me when I was in my, I guess my late teens, early 20s, when I first moved up here was the Gaslight Anthem's 59 sound, which completely changed my mindset on what music should sound like or could sound like. This is a trad rock and roll group without sounding, contrived or anything like that. These are 4 individuals that just want to play really good, fun music and have a good time. And it's very reminiscent of that. If you want to sit back, spark a spliff, put some records on the old turntable, blow the dust off of it, this is the record to do it to. Let me know what you guys think. If you want me to eat shit and go back to doing death metal records, I'm still going to do death metal records. I'm ultimately going to do records like this too because I enjoy it. But you can still tell me to eat shit. I'll see you later.